Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 24th and tonight's movie is Hush. As you may have noticed, I try to make jokes in the description for all of these Horror Nights videos. And back in the very first Horror Nights, I watched the movie Don't Breathe. In the description of that one, I made a joke about how it would be so much easier to rob a deaf person. Little did I know, that movie actually did exist. A couple years later, I found out about Hush, which was released in the same year, 2016. In a lot of ways, Hush is sort of like a complement to Don't Breathe. Instead of following the intruders, we're following the homeowner. And instead of the homeowner being blind, this time the homeowner is deaf. Hush was also directed by Mike Flanagan, the same person who directed Oculus, one of the best movies from the first Horror Nights in 2017. This movie also reminds me of The Strangers and the fact that it really just seems like a person living their life, and then all of a sudden some stranger that she's never seen before breaks into her house and tries to kill her. Or he might not be a stranger, I don't know. What I do know is that he's wearing a mask that also is very reminiscent of the mask from Eyes Without a Face. This movie is going to be interesting. Obviously, the homeowner is at a severe disadvantage, but I get the impression that she's not going down without a fight and she's going to be very resourceful in battling against the intruder. I'm going to go watch it and I'll let you know what I think. Overall, I would say that Hush was very good. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. It's not without its flaws, but for the most part, they take this situation and they handle it very well. The main character is named Maddie, and she's played by Kate Siegel, who co-wrote the film with the director, Mike Flanagan, and Mike Flanagan and Kate Siegel are married, so they're definitely very close and they work together to make this happen. This is a very unique premise because all other movies I can think of with the thing where it's like one sense is missing and the rest of the movie has to work around that, all of them have dealt with not being able to see. Don't Breathe, the guy was blind. In A Quiet Place, the aliens were blind. In Descent, the monsters were blind. So all of that goes towards you can't make any noises if you don't want to get spotted. This is the opposite. The man in this movie, he's never given a name, I'm just going to call him the intruder. He can make as much noise as he wants, but he can't get in the line of her sight. Also, usually these types of movies are from the point of view of the people who have all their senses instead of the point of view of the person or character with the senses removed. As already stated, Kate Siegel does very well as Maddie, but the actor who played the intruder, John Gallagher Jr., also does a very good job in his performance. He's a bit like the killer in the Poughkeepsie tapes in that he's smart, he's ruthless, and we know nothing about him. This is a lot like Don't Breathe, and a lot of this movie comes down to cat and mouse between the homeowner and the intruder. This didn't work out very well in Don't Breathe because the main characters, the intruders, the ones we were supposed to be rooting for, kept making dumb decisions over and over. In Hush, both sides are a lot smarter, although there are a couple, I'm not going to say flat out dumb decisions, but a couple of very questionable decisions on Maddie's part. Still, on the whole, it wasn't frustrating the way that Don't Breathe was. This movie is at its best when it's just a pure battle of wits between Maddie and the intruder. The problems come when they stray away from that and sort of distract from what makes the movie really good. From beginning to end, Hush was very solid, with a few contrived plot points here and there. It's unique, if nothing else, but it also is executed pretty well. Now I want to go into some spoilers. Pretty much everything in this movie is the opposite of how it was in Don't Breathe. In Don't Breathe, they planned to go to the blind man's house and rob him, and it was going to be easy because he's blind. In this one, the intruder was actually trying to kill her neighbor Sarah, and Sarah escaped, I guess, and was running up to Maddie's house and was banging on the door, screaming for Maddie to help, but Maddie wasn't facing that window, so she couldn't see it, which means that she didn't know what was happening. Although, I really feel like with her banging against the, window door, all the doors in this movie that lead to the outside have glass in them, but with her banging against that glass as hard as she was, I feel like she would have at the very least felt the vibrations, especially because this house is propped up. It's not on the ground. I'm not deaf and my house isn't on stilts and I can still feel the vibrations of doors opening and closing in my house sometimes. And I wouldn't be nitpicking this so much if they didn't use feeling vibrations later on in the movie. There were also 2 occasions in this movie where Maddie had a perfect opportunity to make a run for it and chose not to. There was a point where she set off her own car alarm so that the intruder would go check it out, and the intruder was taunting her with Sarah's dead body earlier, and Maddie remembered that Sarah had her phone in her back pocket, But when she got out the window to like check on it, she kept fumbling. She didn't even get out the window all the way, which definitely impeded her mobility, but she was like fumbling around with the back pocket for like 30 seconds. And I really feel like in that time she could have just climbed out the window and made a run for it. She lives in the middle of the woods. It wouldn't be that difficult to lose the guy following her. And then there's the time, like maybe 20 minutes later, where she gets on the roof because she goes like up through her attic and out the window, and she gets on the roof and she makes a distraction by throwing a flashlight off into the woods. But instead of running away when he goes over to check it out, she like tries to like shimmy along the roof. I don't know what she was doing. If she was trying to get to a place that was lower, it was taking way too long. She should have just jumped. If she was just trying to get on the roof, there was no point in throwing the flashlight. But I think the dumbest "we just put this in so that the movie won't end prematurely" moment in Hush was like a thing that absolutely ground the movie to a halt. Her neighbor Sarah has a boyfriend, and the boyfriend like came over, and then there was this thing where the intruder like came up pointing a flashlight at him saying like, get down, put your hands where I can see him," and he was able to convince him that he's a cop. And not only does he look and act very suspicious, he didn't have a gun, he didn't have a uniform, he didn't have a badge, there wasn't even another car parked in the driveway. John does eventually catch on, but it takes way too long. But after that, they stop adding in those contrivances that just extend the plot, and they get back to the cat and mouse that's really good in this movie. One thing they did that I liked a lot was that at the very beginning, Maddie was talking about when she's writing, sometimes she like hears a voice in her head, and it's like an adult voice, even though she went deaf and mute when she was 13, I believe. And there's a point where like it seems like all options are gone, and she's about to die, and she sits down and she like goes over all the options and possibilities in her head with that voice. And that voice is represented by another Maddie who's sitting right next to her. She got shot in the leg with a crossbow, so she can't run away. And yes, the intruder has a crossbow. Seems a little random. I think a gun would be easier to use. She can't hide because she's bleeding out of her leg, so she needs to, like, get help soon or she's gonna die. So the only remaining option is that she has to fight back. There's a few more good moments and good scenes of the two fighting, but eventually Maddie does win, and it ends with her sitting on like the front porch of her house, and you see the blue lights of the police coming, and she has blood all over her, but she triumphed, and she's sitting there, and she smiles, and then the movie ends. I also realized this legitimately like 10 seconds ago. Why would this movie be called Hush? It's not like anybody in this movie has to be quiet at any point. The intruder can and does make as much noise as he wants, and that doesn't matter at all, so it was kind of a weird name for the movie. But obviously that's nitpicking. Overall, I think that this movie was done pretty well. It's not as good as Oculus, definitely not, but it is a pretty good, like, slasher or home invasion type of movie. If you liked movies like Don't Breathe or The Strangers, I would recommend checking this out. It was done pretty well. Okay, we have 1 week left in Horror Nights. Only 7 movies remain, so we're almost done. I'll see you guys tomorrow.